Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Williamsburg Botanical Garden Learn and Grow series for May of 2021. I am Judith Alberts. I serve on the board of directors at the garden. Some housekeeping for today. Yes, we are recording and we'll be posting this on YouTube. Everyone who registered will get a link to the recording and that will be on YouTube. Okay, please make sure that you are muted. We recommend turning off your camera for your privacy. Close your other applications and devices that would be using up bandwidth and interfere with Zoom. We will be using the chat box for your questions. And we're going to be using some polls with today's presentation. And if you are, you will see a poll pop up. You click your answers, and in this instance, we are doing polls with multiple questions. So you have to go down the questions and then hit submit. We'll be monitoring it. And when we feel that we have sufficient participation, we'll close the poll and share the results. Everything is anonymous, so don't worry about that. If for some reason the poll does not disappear automatically, click close on your screen. Excuse me, and bear with us, we're volunteers. For those of you joining us for the very first time, thank you. And to our regular visitors and Learn and Grow attendees, welcome back. A little bit about the garden. First time guests, the first thing you need to know is that we are open every day of the year from 7 a.m. until dusk. And it's always free to visit the garden. The garden is located within Freedom Park. It's quite small. It's only 2 acres and basically a traffic circle. As you enter the park from way over here, you go around one side, come over to the parking area. This is the interpretive center where we used to hold these sessions in person before COVID, and hopefully we will start doing that again. There's a path that from the parking area that comes along here. You take a hard right turn and you go to our main gate. We're only 2.5 acres, but we certainly pack a lot into it with over 18 distinct garden areas, which include a wildflower meadow, woodlands, an English-style cottage garden, 3 types of wetlands, a native grass garden, and a soon-to-be-finished carnivorous plant display, to name only a few. Now, the garden is intentionally more natural than what you might expect from the words botanical garden. It is definitely not precisely maintained displays of high-maintenance plantings. We don't pull out a fading display and pull in a truckload of fresh plants. What grows in the garden is what's blooming in the garden, and it blooms in its own time. We're more like a wild child. We emphasize native plants and sustainable practices that are pollinator friendly, such as leaving standing stems in the meadow during the winter to provide food and habitat. The garden is officially registered as Monarch Butterfly Way Station number 3394. The garden's mission is to demonstrate environmentally responsible and sustainable gardening practices and to offer education on related topics. Everything in the garden is tended by dedicated volunteers, and we do it on a slim budget. So yes, here comes the pitch. We are a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit corporation, and receive no funding at all from any level of government. Learn and Grow programs are free, and we would normally have a nice donations jar at the registration table. So we have now a virtual donations jar. If you'd like to support the garden further, please consider a membership. If you are shopping for bulbs, please look at Brent and Becky's in Gloucester. They donate a very generous 25% of your order total to nonprofits enrolled in the program, but you have to start at bloominbucks.com. And if you are an Amazon shopper, please start at Amazon, at smile.amazon.com. And yes, it is a very small percentage of your purchase that goes to the charity of your choice. But I keep doing these little milestone announcements on these Learn and Grows. About a year ago, we started monitoring the dashboard. We had all 5 supporters, and I was one of them. I had no idea who the other 4 are, and we do not know who they are because it's completely anonymous. We don't know who you are or what you buy. But now we have 25 supporters. So, you know, sometime this month we'll be getting a check. It won't be huge, but it's better than nothing because every penny counts. The garden is on Facebook with our page. And if you raise monarch butterflies, please join us on the Milkweed Connection. It is intended to be a localized group. So if, you know, somebody who's on the other side of Virginia, we're not going to be able to help you find milkweed because it's really very local. The garden is on YouTube and on Instagram. So what's happening this month? Saturdays in May, in fact, it's happening right now, from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. in the afternoon, the Master Gardener's mobile help desk is on site in the garden to answer your questions. And there is a lovely little bucket over here that you'll see. If you need a rain gauge, we have free rain gauges for you. Also this month, the Honor Box ongoing plant sale is there. The plant rack, which was newly rebuilt this year, and we are so proud of it. I mean, it's really sturdy. It holds a lot of plants. It's great. That is going on through May 31st, all day long at your leisure. And we will have about 300 native plants available this coming Monday afternoon. So I'm very excited about that. Next month's program will be about cicadas with Dr. Sean T. Dash, who's an assistant professor at Hampton University. The last item before I introduce our speaker is that Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists can claim this as continuing education hours. Today's program is all about tree care. Our speaker is Patsy McGrady, who became a Master Gardener in 2010, shortly after retiring. In 2012, she attended Tree Steward Training, which is an advanced area within Master Gardeners. And she became a member of the Peninsula Tree Stewards and calls herself a true tree nerd. Under the leadership of the Peninsula Tree Steward Coordinator, Patsy is the author of 2 of the chapters in the current training manual that is used by the Virginia Cooperative Extension for all tree steward trainings across the Commonwealth. Patsy started Tree Call as a project in 2016 and was the leader of that project for 3 years. And with a Tree Call, if you are a homeowner and you've got a tree problem, you can request a team of tree stewards to come out. They will look at the tree, assess the problem, and give you recommendations on how to proceed. Ms. McGrady was president of the James City County, Williamsburg Master Gardeners Association in 2020. Thank you and welcome to Patsy McGrady. Patsy, I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
And you have the mic and the video.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, are we up?
Yes, you're up.
Very good. Well, good morning, everyone. And today we're going to talk about volcano mulching and other tree crimes. We all commit crimes against trees. I've committed crimes against trees. And overall, trees can be very forgiving of these things that we do to them. However, sometimes we put them in a downward spiral that can lead to their decline and even their death. I'm going to start with something a bit corny, shall we say, but I think a lot of us remember this poem, one of the first poems we probably ever learned when we were children in grammar school. I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. Of course, that's from Trees by Joyce Kilmer, 1913. And apparently it was very popular during World War I. And this is a picture actually taken from the Biltmore House in Nashville, North Carolina, looking out over the estate. And I thought it was it's such a beautiful perspective from there, with all the trees starting to come out in the spring. Truly showcases how beautiful trees can be. Well, given that trees are so beautiful, why are we so mean and thoughtless to them sometimes? And I found this little graphic down in the corner on the left-hand side that I think kind of encapsulates how we do this, where the planet is looking at a human saying, "I'm with stupid." Okay, we're going to start off with volcano mulching. There are some crimes against trees that are so prevalent that people think that that is the correct way to treat a tree. One of those is the volcano mulching. What is volcano mulching? It's inches of mulch piled up around the tree trunks. It is so prevalent that wherever you go, you can easily find examples of it. People think that it looks good. And it's actually what I would call a copycat crime. We see everybody else doing it, so we think we're supposed to do it, and we do. And why is it a crime? Well, tree trunks are meant to be above ground and generally dry. The mulch holds that moisture against the bark and can cause it to deteriorate. It can cause rot in the tree bark, and that leads to insect damage or allows the entrance of bacteria and fungus into the tree, leading to decay. And young trees, if you do this to young trees, they don't develop the proper root flare. And it's that root flare that gives them the stability so that they can withstand storms and hold on to that ground. Now, that doesn't mean we don't want to do mulching, because mulching is one of the things that is very beneficial for a tree. But when you mulch, you really want to keep it 2 to 4 inches deep. And I would definitely lean more to 2 than 4. Take it out to the drip line for young trees, or for mature trees, at least 3 feet from the trunk, and don't let it touch the trunk. Now, I have yet to see any example of anyone who's done mulch that doesn't touch the tree trunk. My mulch is worn out in my front yard, and I'm waiting for new mulch, so I couldn't even go out and take a picture in my own yard of this. But you can think of the 3-3-3 rule. Mulch is 3 feet from the tree, keep it about 3 inches deep, and try and keep it about 3 inches away from the trunk of the tree. This picture that you see on this slide is one that I was driving down the street a few days ago, and I saw where someone had just mulched this tree, and it was so beautifully done. I literally slammed on my brakes, did a U-turn, and went back to take a picture, which may be one of the first times in history anyone has slammed on their brakes to go back and take a picture of mulch. But the mulch has many benefits for the tree. It retains the moisture, it inhibits the weed growth, where the weeds do compete for nutrition in the soil from the tree. And it also improves the soil as it decomposes. We think of mulch decomposing from one perspective, it's, oh my, I've got to put new mulch in. But then from another perspective, it does take a while for the mulch to decompose. But over time, it really is very beneficial for the soil that the tree's growing in. And the mulch also is a very good defense against mechanical injury to the tree, and we're going to be talking about that a little later. I wanted to say a few more words about mulching. One good thing to do when you're mulching is to put down newspaper. I would not recommend, say, killing the grass around the tree, and we're going to talk a bit more about that later too. But cut the grass low, put about 5 layers of newspaper on it, and then 2 inches of mulch on the top of that. Another couple of comments I wanted to make about mulch is that actually, if you can get wood chips, say you have a tree being cut down or your neighbor has a tree being cut down, and while the company that cuts the tree is there and they're putting it through a wood mulcher, they probably would be glad to give you the wood mulch, the wood chips. And that makes very good mulch to use around trees. You used to hear that you shouldn't use the fresh wood chips because they would suck the nitrogen from the ground. But newer research has shown that's not true, and the wood chips make a really good mulch around the tree. A couple of things to avoid. Please don't use plastic sheeting underneath your wood mulch. And actually, please don't use the landscaping fabric either. The plastic sheeting is definitely the worst because the water can't permeate it when it rains. But in both of them, what will happen is the mulch will sit on top and it will decompose, and weed seeds will come in and you'll get weeds anyway. So they really don't serve the purpose that you're trying to use them for. Newspapers make a very good base for the mulch, and they do decompose too. Okay, crepe murder. The term crepe murder is thought to originate out of Southern Living magazine in the 1990s. I'm guessing that it may have been from the Grumpy Gardener column. It sounds like something the Grumpy Gardener would say, but I'm not even sure if the Grumpy Gardener column was in the magazine in the 1990s. Of course, what is crepe murder? You can see it everywhere you go in this area. Crepe myrtle is horizontally cutting off the tops of crepe myrtles all the same height. Looks like you came through with a chainsaw, did just one big horizontal cut. It's everywhere you go. I swear, I think maybe 80% of the crepe myrtles in this county have had this done to them this spring. And people do it because they see everybody else do it. It's another copycat crime. It lowers the height of the tree. Some people like that aspect, and people think it encourages more bloom. But I think when you get to the heart of it, it's just one of those things that has gotten to be a thing to do, and people see everyone else do it, so they do it too. But what it reminds me of was, a few hundred years ago in China, when they bound women's feet, and it was a sign of a certain status to have bound feet. But that's not good. This isn't good either. So why is it a crime? Well, it ruins the intrinsic shape of the tree, and it leaves these scars. It's really ugly. What you'll get is you may get larger blooms, but you're not going to get more blooms. And the blooms that you get are going to be on these weaker branches that can't support them, so they're going to droop. You're going to reduce the air that moving to the branches in the sunshine, so that may make you more inclined to have some problems there. And Virginia Tech actually has done a study on this and shown that you will get more blooms if you do not do this to your trees. Some examples around town. I call this one on the left a munchkin tree. And actually it's sort of cute, except that crepe myrtles are not supposed to look like this. Really, the same place where I found this tree, I sort of did a half turn, and there were these nicely shaped crepe myrtles on the side of this restaurant. I thought, well, I'll take a picture of those as a do be and compared to the don't be. They did have that vase shape that we've mentioned that had been allowed to grow naturally. But then when I looked a little bit closer, I realized here on the right-hand side that they had been very incorrectly pruned. And it seems obvious, excuse me, why the cuts were made, because they're right next to a driveway. You had probably had limbs that were over the driveway and they needed to be taken out for safety, but they were just hacked out. And you should never make a pruning cut or leaving these knobs extending. Pruning cuts should always be made close to the main branch. Proper pruning is beneficial to a tree. You always want to cut out the dead and deceased limbs that are rubbing against each other. And crepe myrtles are really prone to have suckers at the bottom of the plant. So you want to cut those out. Never use Roundup on these. This is not the kind of place where you use Roundup. If you use Roundup, Roundup is systemic. It goes in and it's absorbed by the overall tree. So you just want to cut those things off. And you can also remove the old flowers to encourage new blooms on the tree. Crepe myrtles are so common in this county that I sometimes think that anybody who moves in should be met by a welcome wagon carrying a crepe myrtle for them as soon as they move into a place. Oops. Okay. This crime isn't as common as crepe murder, but it is something that you do frequently see, particularly once you start looking for it. Topping a tree. Now, the official definition is drastic removal or cutting back of large branches of a mature tree. Sometimes you do see them where they just, someone has gone in and just really cut all the major branches off of a tree, looking like they're trying to just amputate all the tree. And they do it to reduce the height and size. They're afraid the tree may fall over perhaps, and maybe that's why they're trying to reduce it. And why is this harmful? This really is extremely harmful to the tree. You're cutting off all of the areas where the leaves grow, so you're immediately putting the tree into a starvation mode. Exposing the bark to sun scald, and these stubs are just open wounds. They're an open invitation for insects and fungus because the tree's highly stressed, and that's the kind of place that insects and fungus really see an opening to go in and do their thing. And when you do get new growth, the new growth is poorly attached, it's weak stems, and you will get rapid new growth from that and possibly death. This is a crime that really can result in the death of a tree. Plus, let's not overlook the obvious. This is pretty darn ugly. Some examples that I saw was in Asheville recently, and there were Asheville seems to use tulip populars a lot as a street tree, which surprised me because we just don't see tulip poplar used here as street trees. These tulip poplars, you can see why they cut them down. They're right next to a highway and next to a fast food restaurant and the sign. They were probably covering up the sign. So someone went out and just hacked them down. But it really doesn't serve the purpose intended because these will grow out very shortly and they will once again be covering the sign. The charitable thing to do would be just to cut these trees completely down and be done with it. This next example, I was driving by a place I was familiar with, and I glanced over to the side and thought, oh, that looks like a weeping cherry. And then I realized that's no weeping cherry, that's a holly tree. It's a holly tree with the top removed. And it's hard to see in this picture, but there's about 4 inches of exposed trunk above the top limb. So it's, I have no idea why anyone would do this to a holly. This next example is a logical one to understand what happened. It's a cherry tree. The person who had it knows that he's not going to get cherries off the cherry tree unless he puts netting over it, and he'd been doing it for several years. Well, the cherry tree was getting taller with each year, and it reached the point that he felt he really couldn't use the net on it as tall as it was, so he cut it off. And if you can see in this picture, there are, let me see, if you see these ridges here, these are conchs. These are fungus that have grown. This whole section here is rotted out. This was just chopped at the top, and you can see these areas here were just chopped off with leaving sticks, and all of this is dead. The rest of the tree is still alive, so there's still a chance to save the tree. And this was a tree call that I had several years ago, and our recommendation was to go in and cut the tree with proper pruning cuts below all this decay, and hopefully he would be able to save the tree. But you don't want to end up doing this, so don't do this to your fruit trees. If they're too tall, they're too tall. The time to worry about the height of a tree is when you buy the tree. You need to pay particular attention to the expected height. And sometimes you do have to remove the top of a tree because the tree is dead on top. This is a tree, it was my mystery tree behind my house. And it took me years to realize that this was a tupelo because I wasn't familiar with tupelos. But this was cut off about 10 years ago, and you can see here's where the cut's made. And you can also see how there were branches close to that cut, and those branches now have become the leaders on the tree. So the tree actually now has pretty good shape. It's lived, it's very green when it comes out, and it seems to have survived all of this. But this was a cut that was made for a very specific reason. If we had not made the cut, the tree would have just continued with the rot, probably extending further down to the trunk. Wild beast. Yes, they're all wild beasts all around us. Sometimes we think they're cute and charming. Sometimes we think, gosh, can't they find their own food to eat? Why are they always eating my plants? What do? Well, they eat the leaves. Sometimes that's easier to take than when they eat the bark. Rabbits are prone to eat the bark of very young trees, very prone. This is rabbit damage here on this first tree on the left. And it happened when the first year the tree was planted. The tree's been in about 4 years now. You can still see the damage that was caused by that eating by the rabbits. This was a tree that I had, and when I realized what had happened, I did put a barrier around it so they couldn't get into it. So I just took the barrier off this year because I figured the tree was old enough now that the rabbits would leave it alone. Deers, one kind of damage by deers that sometimes we don't think about is that deers like to rub their antlers on the trunks of small trees. And on the right-hand side, we see an example of that. There are certain trees that they like more than others. And I don't have a list with me of those, I'm afraid. And then another example are beavers who came into a marshy creek area that was a bit behind my house and really did a job on, you can see this just very classic beaver cutting down trees. I mean, it was really kind of fun to see. However, I have the suspicion that they're continuing to cut down trees. And if it keeps on, I'm going to have waterfront property. So how do you prevent that? Well, we generally think of spraying, say, with deer repellent, and that may help if they're eating the leaves of trees. But certainly you may want to use something like plant skill to keep rodents and rabbits from eating the bark of young trees. Plant skill, you get it in a granular mode, and it's good for keeping animals away when they're when they're trying to get to low-level plants. So you're looking for like small animals and damage that's occurring close to the ground. And plant skill, the rabbits do seem to not like that. But really the best thing is physical barriers. You can take the hardware cloth as it's called, and make a ring for the tree. You can buy these tree guards. I always feel the easiest place to go for anything is Amazon. I don't know if they carry them at Lowe's and Home Depot because I've never looked, because I just always go to Amazon because it's so easy. But you can make these tree guards easily using 2-liter soda bottles. You don't want to leave them on forever, but certainly while the tree is young. And in this area, if you notice rabbits, particularly, if you're going to plant a new tree, you really do need to put these tree guards on. Okay, I think we are at the point for our first poll. At this point.
Okay, we should have the first poll up. Hopefully you're seeing that. There are 6 questions, so this is a bit of a quiz. Have you been paying attention? We'll go through each one and then hit submit. Okay, I'm seeing a vote come in. More votes are coming in. Yay. Yeah, having multiple questions does slow down the voting a little bit, but this is good news. Okay, it does take a little longer. Patsy, while we're waiting, I'm going to give it a few more minutes,
Okay.
or just a few more seconds, but I wanted to ask the question of, you keep saying young tree, young tree, young
Yes.
tree. When does a tree when is a tree no longer considered young? Like,
Well, I don't know if there's an official definition. I mean, there is an official terminology where you have a seedling and a sapling and then a mature tree. And I expect there is a definition between sapling and a mature tree. But I would say certainly a tree that's the diameter is less than about diameter of the trunk is less than 2 inches. Certainly trees, when you buy them, even say the kind you get from maybe when you pay $150 for them, are about 1 inch in diameter, and those are definitely young trees. Once they get to about 3 inches, you know, they're pretty stable in terms of maintaining themselves.
okay, I ended the polling and I'm sharing the results right now. So people are, those of you who are looking at this,
Okay.
do you want to go through these questions here? Volcano mulching protects the base of tree trunks. Is that true?
Yes. No, it does not protect. It damages the base of the tree trunk. Does it result in more blooms? That's false. It does not result in more blooms. It results in less blooms, but it's true that it does result in larger blooms, even though those blooms are not well supported by the weak stems and branches that they're attached to. You should never prune a crepe myrtle. That's false. All trees probably need pruning at some point. Topping a tree is an acceptable method of controlling height. False. Very good. Physical barriers are the best way of predicting damage by wildlife. True. Very good. All right.
All right. Okay, I'm going to close this off and take it on back.
Okay, now we're moving on to domestic violence. Let me take this off my screen here. What is it? I use the term domestic violence really to refer to mechanical damage, mechanical agents damaging a tree. This is usually caused by mowers, by string trimmers, and also by cars or automotive vehicles of some type. The string, see this little one down here that's damaged by a string trimmer. You can see why this has occurred. Somebody's out trimming the grass. The grass is growing right up to the base of the tree. and it would be almost impossible to trim the grass without damaging the tree at that point. The second one was a tree I encountered in a tree call, and it was a little pear tree. The diameter was just about an inch. It was very limber. Someone was mowing the grass with a riding lawnmower, and they actually completely rode over this tree, took it down to the ground and put these deep gashes in it. But the gashes were all vertical. And so there wasn't a place where the tree was damaged completely around its circumference at one point. So actually, even though the tree was pitiful to look at, there's a good chance that the tree would recover because of the damage being vertical rather than being horizontal around it. The third one is something that all of us have seen many places. This is a tree that was along a curvy road and probably was hit by a car at some point, fairly severely hit by a car. All of these are really open wounds when they happen. So you're exposing the tree to decay, insects, fungus infections, and you're also damaging the nutrition flow in the tree because the nutrition flow is occurring just underneath the bark where the leaves are sending the food down to the roots, and the roots are sending nutrients up to the leaves. And who's the criminal here? Really is carelessness in all these cases. It's carelessness both in terms of the people who are operating the mechanical things that are causing the damage, but it's generally also a bit of carelessness in people who planted the trees. When you have grass going up to the trunk of the tree, it's almost impossible to maintain a yard and not damage that tree. So here comes another place where mulch is very important to have under a tree. So out to the tree canopy or at least 3 feet from the trunk. Also another case where tree guards for young trees play a very important role. Benign neglect. This is the crime that I have committed. I got a new tree that was recommended by a landscaper. What I really wanted was a forest pansy redwood, would have red leaves in the spring when it comes out. But he persuaded me that I should get a different variation of a redwood that I hadn't seen before, and it was neat looking, and I thought, okay, I'll get it. But in my heart, I really didn't want that tree, and I was not good about watering it. So I had a new tree that I rarely watered during the winter, and guess what? By next spring, it was dead. But then I got my pansy redwood, and I have been very good, redbud, and I have been very good about watering it. So benign neglect really is damage to tree that's just caused by forgetting something, or sometimes just by ignorance. If young trees need to be watered, at least the first 2, even into the 3rd year, you really need to watch them. And starting out, they probably need to be watered 2 to 3 times a week for the first month or so, and then you can start spacing it out. But it's very easy to forget to water during the winter because we don't think about if we've had a dry winter or if it's been wet. But when you have a tree that this is its first or second winter, you really need to watch that and go out and water the tree. Other things we do is maybe there's a tag around the tree. You see this up here. Somebody left a tag with a metal tie on, and it's strangled around the tree. What you don't see is the top of this tree, which is turned black and almost looked like fire blight had gotten into it, but it's really dying because of this damage here. Another common thing is when people put in a tree, they put in these supports to hold it upright, and they leave the supports in for too long. And you can see here, these supports have cut into the tree. Support should never be left over 2 years at the very max, and probably taken down at the end of 1 year, if not sooner. Another common occurrence is you get a young tree and it comes with this straight stick to help it stand upright. You plant it with the stick and then forget to take it out. And see, this tree has grown around that stick. None of these are helpful to the tree. Another thing that's done is, and people just don't think about it damaging the tree, is parking cars underneath trees or close to trees. Also, if you have construction close to trees, this compacts the soil, and you may not see an immediate result on the tree, but over time, it can really cause a lessening in the vigor of the tree, and ultimately it can cause the death of the tree. And again, how do you protect? Again, mulch the tree so people are aware of it, and the mulch creates a stay away from me zone from the tree. And again, the use of tree guards will protect you against that mechanical damage. Whoops. Okay, definitely remove the tree supports as soon as the tree looks pretty stable on its own, but absolutely no more than 2 years. And water the tree when the soil's dry, 1.5 gallons per 1-inch diameter of tree. And again, when you first plant it, aim for watering the tree 2 to 3 times a week, and gradually decrease that to once a week. And then water them in times of drought. And it is difficult in the winter to be aware of times of drought, at least it is for me. But you can really kill a tree if you let it go through the winter. It's a new tree and you're not giving it any water. If you have construction, you do want to fence that off from your trees, and don't let people park their cars under trees. And don't forget winter. Trees get thirsty in winter also. And one of the best ways to water a tree is to have a very slow flow through a hose, and just let the hose lay there on the tree for maybe a half an hour. Okay. Beware the power lines. We've all seen these. This tree on the right is a tree on Old Richmond Road, just as you start into Lightfoot, and you can see where it was pruned for the power lines. But pruning for the power lines is a necessary thing to do, because it keeps those lines safe so the tree doesn't interfere with that, and particularly in times of a storm, cause the power lines to go down. But it does result in trees that are misshapen and sometimes very grotesque tree forms. Now, why is it a crime? It's a crime because it ruins a natural tree form, and it can leave a tree in such a strange position and shape that it can cause the tree to be more likely to be blown down in a storm. But who's the actual criminal here? It's really not the power companies. The power companies have to do this to preserve the safety of the power lines. Nobody wants to lose their power. The real criminal here is the person who plants the tree. You just have to be very mindful in planting trees. If you have overhead power lines, you do not want to plant the trees close to them. Or if you plant trees close to them, you want to use an appropriately sized tree. So for 15 feet either way of a power line, consider that a low zone. If you plant a tree in there, you want a tree that's about 20 feet tall or less. But there's a good range of choice for trees there. A lot of them are ornamental trees. I mean, this is not the place to plant an oak, let's face it. The VCE puts out a publication, it's VCE Pub 430-029 on trees and shrubs for overhead utility easements. And they give a long list of different plants that work well in those zones. So if you want plants in those areas, it's easy to find very nice looking plants that fit in there. Okay, and I believe, Judith, we are ready for poll number 2.
I'm popping that up now. Let's see. Launch polling, there we go. Okay, tree care quiz 2. The questions are: applying an appropriate amount of mulch is one of the best things one can do for a tree. Question 2, and I'm narrating this for the recording. Number 2, forgetting to water a young tree is one of the easiest ways to kill it. Number 3, it is essential that utility companies should not prune trees near power lines. And the 4th question is: no trees should be planted within 15 feet of a power line. True or false? We have the polling results coming in. We have about 73%. Well, Patsy, I'm really soaking all of this up because I bought myself a little tulip poplar over at the Honor Box sale.
Oh, okay.
And I am thrilled. Okay, we're at 82% voted. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. I hope everyone who wanted to has had a chance to do it. And here are the results.
Okay. Yes, one is definitely true. Mulching is one of the best things you can do for a tree. It has multiple benefits for the tree, both protecting it in a physical sense and then secondary benefits such as retaining moisture, keeping the ground cool, inhibiting weeds, etc., etc. Forgetting to water young trees, one of the easiest ways to kill it. Yes, I can give personal testimony on that. And it's essential that utility companies not prune trees. False, correct. They have to prune the trees. That's given. This last one is a little bit of a trick question. No trees should be planted within 15 feet of a power line. It's no tall trees. No trees at expected height over 20 feet should be planted. There's a nice, pretty wide range of trees, many of them ornamental trees that are quite suitable, have heights less than 20 feet, and you can plant them within that 15 feet zone of a power line. Okay, moving onward.
All right, back to you.
Okay, poison. No one wants to poison a tree. I don't think anyone would go out and intentionally poison a tree. Of course, that might be the basis for a plot for a TV show. One of the things that's different about trees versus shrubs and perennials, we think of going out in the spring and putting down polytone for our acid-loving plants, and putting down other kinds of fertilizers for our other shrubs and our perennials. But do not include your trees in this annual fertilizing event. Trees do not need to be regularly fertilized. They really only need fertilizer when there's some lack of nutrition in the soil, or there's some specific problem with the tree. And in fact, the official guidance on this is that if you think your tree is failing in some sense and you're thinking about fertilizing it, you should get an analysis of the soil, or you should talk to an arborist about it. I realize that's something that probably people would be reluctant to do because it does take quite a bit of effort. But I think the fact that that's the guidance for when to use fertilizer is an indication that just don't go out and fertilize your trees on a regular basis. It's not good for them. Broadleaf weed killers damage trees because trees are broadleaf plants. Pre-emergent herbicides, however, are safe to use near trees. So if you're putting something like a crabgrass pre-emergent, you don't have to worry about it damaging your trees. Now, glyphosate, which I can't pronounce, so I'm just going to use the name of Roundup, is non-selective and it can harm young trees. We saw the picture previously of the suckers around the base of a Crape Myrtle. There are other trees that tend to have suckers around their bases. Please do not go out and spray those with Roundup. That can be very damaging to the tree. Even more damaging than regular Roundup is the Roundup Max Control. I'm sure this is something that's most helpful when you have weeds, say, growing in your driveway and you need to kill them, and or places where it's hard to get to pull up weeds. But definitely do not use the Roundup Max around trees. We had a tree call, not one I did. This was one down in Hampton, but it was talked about at a Peninsula Tree Steward meeting. A man had 2 trees in his front yard, 2 young trees, and one of them was really declining. It wasn't leafing out well. What leafed out wasn't really very dark green, and he couldn't figure out what was wrong with the tree. And it ended up that he had used Roundup Max around the tree. And Roundup Max, they add another chemical to the mix in addition to the glyphosate, and that chemical is one that can be taken up by the tree and harm the tree. Mature trees are not as susceptible to young trees to being poisoned, but it's really best to just hand weed around trees. And if you have used Roundup around the tree and you see some decline in the tree, such as in this example photograph here, do not fertilize. That will only make the damage worse. You just need to let the tree tough it out, and hopefully in a year or two it'll come back. Okay, right tree, right place. There are a multitude of subjects that can be talked under this term. I've only used it to talk about one thing, and I'm talking about something that's a pet peeve of mine. But overall, you really need to plant the right kind of tree in the right kind of place for it to do well. So there's all kinds of ways that this could be messed up. But one that you see around here frequently, and people do it in all innocence, and that is to plant spruce trees. Blue spruce are really attractive. They really give you a pop in the landscape. But what happens with spruces around here, this is not a natural habitat for spruces. Spruces live on the higher elevations of mountains, so they don't do well in this warm, humid climate that we have here. You want to choose a tree that's suitable for where you live. Just because they carry a tree in a big box store or at a nursery doesn't mean that it really is suitable for here. Spruces, they may go for a few years and tough it out. They're particularly susceptible to mites, and that's what you're seeing in these 2 pictures here is mites. But let me just throw in, though, a handy tip is if you do have mites on a tree, because they can attack a variety of plants, one of the easiest things to do is just at least once a week hit them hard with a water hose with a lot of pressure, and have that hit all parts of the plant, and it'll knock those mites off, and it's an easy way to try and control them. Okay, why is a tree like a Timex? Because it can take a licking and keep on ticking. A little tree jet. Okay, look at what actually kills a tree. Suppose you've got a tree, it's in pretty good condition. The tree's kind of happy where it's at. Things are going along okay. But then you get some adverse environmental conditions that can include mistreatment of the type that we've talked about. What do you end up with? You end up with a stress tree. Then once you have a stress tree, it's an open invitation for the pathogens to enter, fungus and bacteria and virus. And actually about 85% of problems of this type are caused by fungus. Fungus damage is very, very common for disease trees. So then you end up with a disease tree. And then ultimately, you end up with a dead tree. So it's a process as the tree journeys from being more or less a happy tree to being stressed, to being diseased, to being dead. But one point I wanted to make in going through all of this is that if you've got a tree that's healthy, it's unlikely that it is going to be attacked by insects or by fungus or these other pathogens. Keeping a tree healthy is the best way of keeping it from getting infected. It's sort of like people. When people are stressed out, they're more inclined to be sick. And it's the same way with trees. Environmental conditions that are severe and are stressing out the tree really put the tree in a position where it is more open to catching these pathogens and then becoming disease and ultimately dying. So you want to be kind to your trees. And the first thing to doing that is being kind to it when you plant it. You want to plant it correctly. You want to dig your hole 3 times the size of the width and only the same depth of the root ball. You want to uncover the root flare. If you've got a burlap tree, you want to, you see that you can plant the tree with burlap on it, but that was really written when the burlap was regular cloth burlap, but a lot of times you see synthetic burlap now. Really take that stuff off. Don't plant the tree with any of those wrappings on it. Get that off of there. And what you'll notice if you buy trees now, if you look at what they're planted in, and you'll see this with shrubs too, is if they've been planted in what looks like mulch as a bark medium. It's not really even soil there. So the best thing you can do is remove all of that from the tree. Just take the tree the night before you're going to plant it, put it in a bucket of water or some container with water as best you can. And then the next morning, try and get as much of that original material off the tree and off the roots of the tree and plant it essentially almost like a bare rooted tree. And if the roots are curved, you want to spread them out nicely so you won't get girdling roots. And one of the things that really is counterintuitive is just take your original backfill. Take all that soil that you dug out of the hole and fill that back in the hole. Don't add compost, don't add fertilizer, don't add anything else. Don't put peat moss in, just put that original backfill in. And that's the best way to start the tree out. And also, you do want to plant in the spring and the fall. Don't plant in the heat of the summer. Sometimes you may have to do that for whatever reason, but as best you can, if you're going to buy a tree, try and time it so that you're going to be planting in the spring or the fall. And of course, mulching. As we've talked repeatedly here, mulch around the tree to protect it. And this young tree, when you plant it, put one of those trunk guards around it to protect its trunk. You can prune you should prune. If you get a tree and it's got any dead or damaged branches, you want to go ahead and get them off as you plant it. And water it. When you first plant it, water deeply and thoroughly, and keep watering that plant frequently for the next few months. Also, be kind to your trees. When you prune them correctly. Don't leave knobs sticking out. Prune them close to the collar branch. You prune only to anytime branches are crossing or rubbing, such as this condition here. You need to cut one of the branches out. You may need to prune to increase airflow or to lightly modify the tree shape. But primarily we're going to cut for disease or dead branches or to remove these cross branches. And you want to, again, water deeply and thoroughly the first 3 to 5 years. And good root growth. It'll give you good root growth and a healthy drought-resistant tree. So 1 to 2 years, you have to be particularly careful. 3 to 5, you still have to be mindful of what's going on during drought periods with watering the tree. And then after 5 years, the tree should be pretty well established. Okay. Judith, we're ready for poll number 3.
All right, here we go. Poll number 3. Launch polling. All right. While that is going on, I have just put into the chat, everyone, a link to the Master Gardeners YouTube channel, where there are 3 excellent videos done by the pruning team at the garden, all of whom are master gardeners, and some of whom are tree stewards. And they have done a beautiful job of explaining correct pruning methods. Really nice job on that.
Yes, they do. I'm glad you mentioned those.
And then there is one other link, but I'm not going to try and go grab that because voting is coming in nice and quickly. We have 18 of 24. The questions are, it's better to hand weed around trees rather than use liquid weed killer. I'm going to give this just another second or two. Second question, any tree available is just fine to go ahead and plant here in Virginia Peninsula area. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. The third question is, a stress tree is more susceptible to damage, and always add organic material when planting a tree. Patsy, I'm going to let you just address that one. All the other ones.
Okay, the first one, of course, is true. Everybody got that right. The second one, any tree at the big box store is suitable for planting. No, that's false. You need to check to see, is it suitable for growing in your neighborhood? I might add that if you want to have you want a specialized tree that you can't find at your local nursery or big box, some of the smaller garden centers are very good about ordering trees for you, or you can order from a nursery on the internet, which would probably mean you're going to get a very small little sapling, but that'll just take it maybe an extra year or two to get into a larger size. And it's a very acceptable way of getting a tree that may be difficult to find. Stress tree is more susceptible to damage from insects and pathogens. Definitely true. And always add organic matter to a tree when planting a tree. That is false. It's one of those non-intuitive things that one just has to keep in mind. And it's kind of easy to remember because it is kind of a strange thing. You wouldn't think it would be that way. Okay.
All right, back
to the finish here. The evolving planet. Sometimes the criminal against the tree isn't even mankind. We have populations of certain tree species that have been reduced over time because of just general environmental conditions. And who's the criminal here? It's not really even mankind. It's Mother Nature herself, for lack of a better term. The planet is changing. The planet has always changed over time. The continents have moved and changed shapes. One of the things we're seeing now are what are called ghost forests. And I think I first heard of these maybe 3 years ago. And they can be very eerie things, as you see in this photograph. And what are they? They are these tall stands of dead trees, dead tree trunks, turned gray because of the salt and the air hitting them. And they're caused by rising seawater, infiltrating fresh water, and then slowly killing these trees. And what did it? Well, there's several factors. One is the melting polar caps causing the sea levels to rise. The other one, which is one that I really wasn't aware of, is that in certain areas, the land is actually sinking from the last ice age. So you get these the seawater rising on one hand and land gradually sinking on the other. And some of the area affected are really close to us in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And then severe shorts and storms and droughts also contribute to this happening. So these are a very eerie thing. And I think that the name conveys that as a ghost forest. What used to be a forest and now they're all dead. However, sometimes there are positive stories. And actually, I'm going to talk about two of my favorite trees. So I sort of thought it was a clever, semi-clever thing on me to figure a way to work these into this presentation. Sometimes there are tree species that were thought to be extinct that actually are being perpetuated by the actions of humans. One of these is the ginkgo. The ginkgo is a very special species of tree. There are 5 groups of seed-producing plants. 3 of those contain most of the trees that we have in this area. One is the conifers, and that's plants that do not produce flowers, but produce seeds mostly in cones. And the seeds, I won't go into anything different than that. The other is angiosperms. Angiosperms produce flowers. And actually, probably 80% of the trees are angiosperms. Most of the flowers are insignificant, and we really don't notice them as being flowers. But it includes most of the deciduous trees, although that is not a good way of separating the 2 groups out. That's an unscientific way of separating them. But then you have the ginkgo. The ginkgo is neither a conifer nor an angiosperm. It does not produce flowers. It does not produce cones. It's a thing unto itself. It's considered a living fossil. It is the only species in its genus. It's the only genus in its family. It's the only family in its class. So it's a one-of-a-kind thing. It's a remnant from long time ago. It was thought to be extinct, but rediscovered in Japan in the late 1600s. But it's really being perpetuated by nurseries. And it's a very common tree. It's a tree that is frequently used as a street tree. It's like that little joke about the Timex. It can take a beating and keep on ticking. And there's a real irony that the tree can survive in such different conditions, and yet it was almost extinct. But it's the only tree that has leaves shaped like a fan. And there's a beautiful ginkgo down at Bruton's Church in the Colonial area. There are ginkgos planted in front of where the Pi Beta Kappa Hall used to be before it was taken down. They're just gorgeous trees. This is a picture taken in the fall. They turn this lovely color of yellow. They're all the same color, and the leaves tend to fall at the same time, maybe within the same 1 or 2 days. All the leaves will come off the tree. Just gorgeous. And they are big trees. The other one is the dawn redwood. The dawn redwood was a very common tree, one of the most common trees in the Northern Hemisphere about 60 million years ago. And there's many examples of it in fossils. But it was thought to have been extinct for millions of years. And then in the 1940s, it was rediscovered in China. The story is that this expedition found the tree and they brought back seeds, and they gave seeds to some of the major academic institutions in the United States at that time. And William and Mary received some of those seeds. And the secretary for the biology department was given the task of germinating the seeds, and she put them in some soil in paper Dixie cups and set them on the windowsill, and they germinated. And if you go down to William and Mary, you can see the resulting trees. They're generally in the area across from the Sadler School Student Center there. And this is a picture of one of those trees. One of the characteristic things about the trees are this buttressing of the trunk here at the base. And the way it's bigger at the base with all these bump outs and then gets narrow as it goes up. These can be very large trees. They are first cousins to the coastal redwoods and the sequoias, and they're like second cousins to bald cypress. They look very much like bald cypress in many ways, but the bald cypress is a more slow-going tree. The dawn redwood's a very fast-growing tree. The bald cypress produces knees, the dawn redwood doesn't. There's various differences, but in many ways, to me, they look very, very similar. But this is a beautiful tree. If you've got lots of land, you can grow a really tall tree. It'd be a really fun tree to have because you can tell people how, see this tree? It just was thought to be extinct. It's been around forever and ever and ever. Okay. We're going to end up here just talking about why trees. Why are we interested in trees? Why are trees important to us? I want to say I was looking through my photographs to see if I could have something to use here, and I came across this. This was taken in the Redwood National Forest in Northern California, and I visited there a few years ago, and it's just absolutely gorgeous to walk through there. Why are trees important to people? There's scientific reasons, but some of the ones most close to home is that trees reduce stress. It's much less stressful being an area where there are trees than being an area that lack trees. Trees cool the air around us. We really notice that in the summer where they provide shade. They actually clean the air. They clean pollutants from the air. So the air is fresher for us to breathe. They release oxygen into the air and remove carbon dioxide from the air. They can, from a practical perspective, they reduce our heating and cooling costs in homes and buildings. And another very practical example, they absorb water from stormwater runoff and reduce erosion. And forests in, oh gosh, I've forgotten, the watersheds. They clean the water that falls there and then drifts into these reservoirs to produce clean drinking water. So, you know, such a deal from all these trees. And they provide a habitat for wildlife. Okay, I wanted to mention just a few resources. There's almost an untold amount of resources on trees on the internet. Every state produces good information. The National Department of Forestry produces really good information. The various botanical gardens provide information, arboretums. Just once you go looking for it, there's lots of information on trees there. But a good overall and very simply presented piece of information is called the Tree Owner's Manual that the Federal Forest Service produces. And if you'd like to get a copy of that, you can actually order it for about $10 off of Amazon, or you can just download it for free off the internet and just go in and Google Tree Owner's Manual, USDA Forest Service, and you'll get a link to that. Virginia Tech produces a good number of publications on various aspects of trees and shrubs. And again, if you just Google VTVC publication trees and shrubs, it'll take you to a list of those. And one of those is the pamphlet they put out on planting trees, which is also excellent guidelines if you're not familiar with how to do that or you're doing it for the first time. I want to remind you, as Judith has mentioned, that we do have a help desk. We do have a program in Master Gardeners called Tree Call. And if you just call the help desk in Tawano, If you have a problem with your tree, if you'd like to have a team of tree stewards, that would be about 2 people, at most 3, come out, take a look at your tree and help you figure out what's wrong with it and what you need to do about it. Now, I want to emphasize one thing that we do not do is we do not give risk assessments, in that we can tell you what things you might want to consider in terms of, is the tree a risk on your property, but we cannot tell you whether you should cut the tree down or not. You really need to go to an arborist for that. Okay, that's it. If you, oh, we have our last poll. Sorry, Judith, I went right by that.
Oh, no worries. Okay, launch polling.
It's a short
one. So for our recording, first question. Oh, yeah, the term ghost forest comes from a 2003 horror movie. The question 2. Oh, did I not launch the poll? No, I launched it. There we go. Here we come. Ghost forests are caused by human neglect. True or false? Trees are pleasing to look at, but otherwise contribute little to the environment. Fourth question, true or false? Trees are really hard to grow, so it's better to just plant some shrubs. For those of you, we're going to give this just a few more seconds. I did put in a link to a pruning guidebook, which is just an excellent resource for how to prune, along with the videos. I'm going to end polling and share the results. So go ahead, Patsy.
Okay. No, ghost forest did not come from a 2003 horror movie. And they're not caused by human neglect. They're one of those big things that just humans didn't cause it. It's just natural occurrences in the evolution of the planet that are causing that. Now, there are approaches for dealing with that land, so the land essentially can be reclaimed and productive, but it does not include saving the trees per se. And obviously, trees are much more than just a pretty thing to look at. They serve many valuable pluses for humans. And are they difficult to grow, so it's better to plant some shrubs? No, of course not. They really are easy to grow if you just plant them right. Remember to water them and mulch those trees. Okay. Judith, do we have time for questions?
We certainly do, and so I'm going to start from the top. Have tree calls in person resumed?
Yes. Actually, even in the spring, they were available for tree calls. At that time, they were saying they would come out and would do social distancing and wear masks. Now, of course, the CDC has change that requirement, and I assume that the tree calls will also modify their approach. But yes, you should be able to get a tree call at your home if you desire.
Question from Marie. Can you discuss the threat of vines climbing tree trunks? I see so many trees that are threatened with suffocation by vines growing into their canopies. And do we know, last part, do we know if there are county initiatives addressing this issue in easement areas?
I do not know if there are county initiatives. I'm not aware of them. My reflex is to say I doubt that there are. English ivy is one of the, it's really a very damaging vine. And I would encourage everybody to resist buying it and definitely resist planting it. If somehow you have to have English ivy, put it in a pot. I know in the Washington area in Rock Creek Parkway, they, I think, have an event every year where volunteers go out to try and kill English ivy on the trees. It's such a problem up there. But I'm not aware of any formal activity in this area to do something about vines. Of course, poison oak, you see poison oak vines sometimes that are just gigantic on trees that have grown into the tree. And porcelain vine is another vine that's becoming really annoying down here and in Northern Virginia too.
Hmm.
But it's a very lightweight vine, very very thin, is easily pullable. But please don't resist the urge to let vines grow up trees. Unless it's something like a clematis vine, which you know is going to be very manageable. It's not going to keep growing and keep growing. Okay.
Next question from Michael. What treatment should be given to trees with mechanical damage?
Well, the only treatment you can, well, two things you can do. If the bark is in long shreds, you can trim the bark off so it's sort of nice and tidy around the wound that's been created. And that will do the best you can to limit insect and pathogen damage into the tree. Then it's really left to the tree, and the tree will develop a callus around that area, and will heal isn't quite the right word, but it's sort of using a human term to a tree. It will really block off that area so that the damage doesn't extend into the tree. But you need to protect it for additional damage so that the tree is able to do that over time. And do not apply anything to it. It used to be recommendations that if there was damage to the tree, or if you cut a limb off the tree, there were these liquid things that you would apply to it. There were sealers. Don't do that. That's been shown to be more damaging to the tree, and they're really not helpful. So you really want to clean the wound, and then just leave it, and the tree will take care of it as best it can.
Thank you. Next question from Mary. How do you safely remove suckers from a tree?
Just cut them off at the base.
With something like bypass, but hand tools.
With hand tools, yes. And you're going to have to do it. It won't be a one-time thing. Those suckers come back.
Oh my goodness, do they ever?
Do they ever come back? So it's just one of those things. You just have to keep at it.
Next question, when pruning a branch from a tree, how far away from the trunk should you cut the branch? What is the branch collar? And for this one, I'm going to say that please go to the pruning videos on the link that I gave you. Harry Fall and his pruning team show excellent examples of what a branch collar is and how to correctly prune a branch. And the pruning handbook also gives diagrams of that information, along with a wonderful calendar of when to prune what. So that is an excellent guide. Next question. Are there male and female ginkgo trees, one of which has a bad odor?
Yes, there are male and female ginkgo trees, and the female produces fruits with the seeds are in the middle of the fruit, and they do produce what is said to be a horrible odor when they ripen and fall off the tree. So when you buy a ginkgo tree, you want to make sure and get a male ginkgo tree. Now, when you read about the ginkgo tree, you'll read that they were thought to have been grown at one point for the seeds that they were like nuts. And that, after they were discovered, late 1600s, people in China grew them specifically for this fruit, but you had to do all the stuff to the nut. And I have a friend who is very adventurous, and she decided she was going to follow those directions and see how tasty were these seeds. And she just had to go through all this stuff to get to the point where the seeds were edible. And then they really were just kind of blah. They didn't really have a distinctive taste. And it was just like, why did I do all this work? So you sort of came out thinking, must be pretty hungry if you have to do all that to eat ginkgo seeds. So, anyway, next question.
It appears we're at the end of the question, but compliments are coming in. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Excellent. This is an excellent long-term reference. Thank you again. Yes, Patsy, this has been a really delightful presentation. And as I said, I'm gonna go out and take care of my little itty bitty baby tulip poplar the right way.
Take care of your trees, and they will definitely more than reward you for the care that you put into them.
And I'm just going to close with one more thought, and that is, we had a tree planting ceremony at the Botanical Garden. It was an Earth/Arbor Day celebration a couple of weeks ago, and it really was a delight. And I was looking up all kinds of quotes, and the best one that I decided to use was, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Yes.
The second best time to plant a tree is now.
Yes. Let me just throw in one additional thought just before we close, and that is, there are many short trees that are wonderful for small yards. You know, if you have a townhouse, or even if you have a single family house, but you've got a small yard, it's very common around here. There are many trees that lend themselves to that. And you can go to Virginia Tech and they have publications on these trees. Many of them are ornamental and they'll bloom once a year and just look gorgeous. So there are many, many options.
Yes. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us and sticking with us all the way to the end. My goodness. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.